seen. And one thing that's fairly striking about the show, which I hope you guys all come because it's really an important show in Watsonville at this time, is that it shows a real diversity of work, from sculpture to really abstract work to real figurative drawings, prints. It's just a lot of really strong work, and the catalog will kind of give you a glimpse of it, but I'm telling you, it's just like mind-blowing to actually be able to go to the artists' studios and really help with the selection of the work and have them tell their stories. And really the whole theme of the exhibit is to create it in our image in West London. And it's sort of to kind of show how we see ourselves. We don't see ourselves as Day of the Dead, and that's the extent of it. Although it's important because I think in the Mesoamerican tradition, that whole idea of duality, which is active in a lot of indigenous cultures, you know, life and death, they are on the same wheel. It's not like weird to me to celebrate death because my parents are from New Orleans and they're kind of like into that stuff too. But I think it's what's really wonderful about the exhibit is it really is the catalog is explaining things in the artist's own words. There's not somebody writing about the work, they're writing about their own work. And with that, there's a lot of variation. Some things are really clear, and sometimes it's not as clear. But the work really speaks to people's feelings about what they think is important to themselves and what they want to put out to you. And sometimes it's really personal stuff. It kind of blows your mind, you know, like there's this one piece by this artist, Victor Cartagena, that shows, it's called The Pugilist, and it shows a guy, just a big, tall drawing, is that a drawing? Of a boxer. And he said, when he was talking about it, he said he was excited that we picked that painting out instead of the work that he's kind of known for. He's from El Salvador, and he does a lot of work on the disappeared and installations that are really beautiful. But when
his family and his brother, like a lot of people from El Salvador, in the 1980s, they had to, you know, leave the country because of the military dictatorships and just the repression that was going on there. So they came to San Francisco and settled in San Francisco. But they're two artists, and a lot of his work is his documentation and his experience as a young man having to face, you know, walking to school or whatever and seeing dead bodies and all that kind of stuff and having to hide. And so it's a really, really different kind of way to approach the work, right? And he's done really major installations and all that. And he's done some really interesting work, him and his brother. And they really have spoken about their experience, you know. And so when we went to his studio, and I'm familiar with their work, but when we went to his studio, he showed me those things, some of those things that were around El Salvador, and they're really kind of dark and all that. And then I'm like, what about that one? Then I started looking at other things, so he was actually quite happy that we ended up selecting something that was really speaking about himself and kind of his evolution as through this boxer, right? Because as a boxer, he said, you know, you get punched, you get hit, you get knocked down, and sometimes it's not the person that wins the fight, but it's the person who get knocked down and get back up. And it's just kind of like a metaphor for life, right? You get knocked down, you get back up, and that's kind of how we use that piece. But I kind of wanted to back up a little bit because I was thinking about, you know, our involvement with the Chicano movement. And my involvement with the Chicano movement is like, I wasn't thinking that I was involved with the Chicano movement. I was just involved with progressive movements that needed things done. So even though I saw myself, it wasn't hard for me to see myself, you know, in the struggle and to support like the United Farm Workers struggle and all that, because we grew up in the fields. So it wasn't a long stretch for me. Of course, I you know, I gravitated to it. But once I got to San Francisco and at San Francisco State, one of the things that happened there was that there was this cross-fertilization of Chicanos and Latin Americans. There were people that were from El Salvador and Nicaragua and Chile, and they were there, and they were in the Mission District of San Francisco. Because for a while there, I was kind of floating around. I lived in the Hay, I lived in the Richmond, I lived everywhere, and I couldn't find a home until I found the Mission, and I found Galeria de la Raza. And it was through Galeria de la Raza that I found a home, and I found the artist, and I found the community. And it was the work of, one of the things that I learned through the Chicano movement and through the Educational Opportunity Program at San Francisco State was an empowerment. Like, what do you do? What is an empowerment? It's an education, but what are you going to do with it? Well, you go out into your community and you empower your community. You gravitate to your community and you help make change in your community. And that's one of the things that we have always been connected to. And then going to Cuba and coming back, it just solidified it. It was like, so from Galeria de la Raza, which I had my first exhibit there with Rupert Garcia. I got involved with La Raza Silkscreen Center. And then I spent 10 years at, I feel like I locked up, but I did 10 years at City College through the Graphics Communication Department. And then I also, you know, I was 10 years at the Mission Cultural Center. And at the same time, I worked 10 years as a volunteer for El Tepolote newspaper in the Mission, and was involved with the early Latino and Chicano journalists that were doing El Pochoche, the magazine that came out of the Mission Cultural Center, and poets like Alejandro Murguia, who's the poet laureate of San Francisco, Juan Felipe Herrera, who's now the poet laureate of the United States through he was just selected.
There's things that both Michelle and Juan have hit on, historical points, places, takeoffs. And so when he mentioned Galeria de la Raza, or they mentioned the Brigade, or they mentioned, all of those things are tied to the Silkscreen Center, but all of those people are tied to different historical points. You know, so when I met Michelle, it was at the Peña in Berkeley. Okay, the Peña had just been formed. When was the Peña? Well, the Peña was September 11th, 1973. September 11th, right? Was the year of the coup in Chile. So that became, even though a lot of us were going through our college experiences, our university experiences, were connecting with other groups, there became focal points throughout the Bay Area for us because we're from the Bay Area, whether I was from San Jose, Richard was from San Jose, these guys were from San Francisco and Oakland, and you know, so all these communities would have places where they would converge, and the dialogues, the conversations would happen. But so would the actions. And so when people would come back from the brigade, you would usually gravitate to the Peña because you want to hear different people's experiences. But also then you would be able to see different people's work, the whole idea of the poster movement. It was so strong, but you're looking at Malaquias, and then when I think about Malaquias, I can't help but think of Jose, his brother, his older brother. Well, those Jose and Esteban Villa and all those crazy guys tied very closely with Teatro Campesino, which was something that I've been participating in since as a young man. Well, when Luis Valdez moved Teatro Campesino from Fresno to San Juan, it became kind of a go-to focal place for artists, musicians, filmmakers, writers, and we converged. You know, and it was sometimes it was just some fluke weekend, everybody'd show up. Well, during that time, somebody had made a homemade canister bomb and took a biplane and drove and flew over the Air Force Base in Sacramento and dropped this like a coffee can. It was literally a coffee can bomb, and it just kind of exploded, made a lot of noises. So the FBI was going nuts. They were going crazy. They were like, okay, these Chicanos and blacks, they're at it. They're going to bomb our. So they started all over the Bay Area, and it was around the same time. Well, a little later it was Patty Hearst, but it was kind of all those things were connected. And so there was a group out of Sacramento, and they called themselves RCAF. It was Raza. Do you remember what else?
Royal Chicano Air Force.
Yeah, well, it became the Royal Chicano Air Force because the FBI came and investigated. They saw RCAF in the pictures in the phone books, and these guys, it's got to be these guys. So they went, it was a bunch of artists, you know, and they had a cultural center. So sure enough, they started riding around in they got an old Jeep, and they had a fake gun that they had made on the Jeep, and they were wearing, and they get dressed up in military garb, and like those old flight jackets, and the hats, and the flaps, and they come flying into San Juan, you know, all these artists hanging out of this Jeep. Well, Jose Montoya was the person who did the first sketches for the play Zoot. So some of you know his work as a writer because he was a well-known poet. He's also the father of a guy by the name of Richard Montoya, who was one of the founders of Culture Clash. So Culture Clash's first event was at the Galeria de la Raza, which was curated by René Yanes. Okay, and
Who was the founder of Galeria de la Raza? One of the co-founders of Galeria de la Raza.
One of the original members of Culture Clash is a guy by the name of Jose Antonio Burciaga, who was a well-known poet, writer, and quite a comic in his own right.
Professor at Stanford.
Yes. He was fired at Stanford by Condoleezza Rice.
Oh, wow.
Work that he was doing. And so the connections to different historical perspectives with these stories, I mean, they're great stories, but they're funny. I mean, you can't help but realize that each one of these stories could actually be its own film, its own. I mean, for me, I started painting when I was 6 years old. It was just what we did in our neighborhood. You know, there's some old folks that lived down in the corner, and they always had crayons and paint and all kinds of stuff. And so they just have that stuff there so kids would go and hang out with them because they like to see little kids. They didn't have any grandkids. The kids in the neighborhood used to hang out there. And, you know, we draw and then my mom decided that I was going to get some art lessons. And art lessons. And so by that time, I think I was like 12 years old, and I ended up having to ride my bike. I lived in San Jose, and she met this woman that had an art studio in Saratoga. So I had to ride my bike from County Hospital to Saratoga for this. Well, she was doing art lessons for a lot of rich little white kids. She'd just tell me, well, go paint down by the river. Well, there's a little river in the back, so I go and I paint. Well, it just so happened that I continue to this day, at 67 years old, enjoy painting out by rivers. Get outside, there's a connection to nature. That's the thing that for me is very, very important. But it started as a little kid in the neighborhood, and then music. My parents had a quartet, a religious quartet, and so we'd have to do our homework in the pews because they would be rehearsing. My brothers and sisters all had perfect pitch. I was the only one that didn't. And so my sisters, you know, like 7 years old, Mom, you're flat, you know. And then years later, it ended up that I was making my living in music. It was weird because they all had perfect pitch. They weren't making their living at it. But then through things like the Teatro Campesino, one of the things that we saw was we're really influenced by the work that they were doing because they were using music as a way to draw emotion. And then when you'd see the simple sets, well, it was art. It was art. It was on those sets. And so my family was very much involved in music, and then in the art part of it, And then the boycott starts, right? And they're starting sending people all over the country. Well, I get sent to Boston. I said, what the hell? The only thing I didn't even, I was like a California guy, small town California guy, I didn't know. I mean, I saw Laurel and Hardy and those guys walking around in Cambridge, you know, with robes and miter boards, and I thought, God, is this what they do? I mean, I had no idea. Years later, you know, a couple of years later, I said, you know, I'll be back in 3 months. It wasn't 3 months. I ended up being there almost 3 years. And during that time, CESAT had gone on a strike, a hunger strike. And there had been a lot of support for the farm workers union during that time, but suddenly it started to wear off. It's no longer the movement of the year. And that was one of the things that we saw about our society, is that there always had to be something new. There always had to be something new to attach to. So it was no longer the movement of the year. People were getting discouraged. And so Caesar, when he broke his fast, the first thing he did is he got a big, huge RV from somebody, took his nurse and a couple of other people, and he went and visited all his families who were out on the boycott. And he constantly had to have a security crew with him. Well, one of the things that the story that just stuck with me is that he was going to Hartford, Connecticut, and in Hartford, Connecticut at that time was a big home of the John Birch Society. And so for Cesar Chavez to go to the home of the John Birch Society was kind of nerve-wracking, you know, but he was going to address people there, and he was determined. He said he felt like a bird in a cage, because he was on his back all the time. He said, you know, drive this thing up, open the door, push him out, he does his little thing, put him back in, drive him to the next town. He gets to spend time with the families, but he would entertain himself in strange ways. One of the things that he did is he had a glow-in-the-dark imperial yo-yo. It's dark, and he played with his yo-yo. So one night, during a presentation, everybody was very, very tense. They were in Hartford, and so he had several bodyguards, and other people were kind of watching around. And I happened to be kind of stationed in the back, and I looked over and I saw this guy just really getting fidgety, and then he leaned forward, and I noticed that in his coat he had a gun. You know, and so I'm trying to get people's attention because I've never done this before. I don't know how to get. So finally, you know, the thing ends. Caesar's starting to walk out. The guy's moving. I finally am able to get a hold of this guy, Mac Lyons, who was his bodyguard, you know. So Mac's trying to move towards him. Caesar's going out. He's, you know, of course, he reminds me of my mother because he's the last one to leave church. He's the last one to leave everything. So he would talk to everybody. This guy's getting closer and closer and closer to him. We get outside. As soon as we get outside, Caesar starts playing with his yo-yo. There's a shh. People are trying to get the yo-yo away from him. The guy's getting closer and closer. And pretty soon, you know, the guy's looking over at Caesar's yo-yo, and he stalls. That second that he stalled, Mac was able to grab him, wheel him out. You know, so got him away from that. I've never forgotten that story because when we told him what happened, he said, well, you know, he didn't get me.
We have a lot of murals, and when the Chicano movement was happening, you find murals in Texas, in Colorado. Things spring up all over the place. You have the group Osco.
Yeah.
Osco means throwing up, right? But these guys were running around in Los Angeles, and they were parading and doing these like little acts out in the street and on Whittier Boulevard, in the front of the museum, because they couldn't get into those museums.
So they held their shows in front.
And they held their shows there, their art shows there. But there's always been a connection with art in terms of, like, you know, Mexico and Central and South America. But, you know, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo were coming to the U.S. Diego Rivera was in the first major museum at the Modern Museum. He was in that exhibit. And he did murals here, and Jose Luis Orozco came, Clemente Orozco came here, los Cuatro Grandes, right, Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros, and I include Tamayo too, because, you know, Rufino Tamayo from Oaxaca, those artists were all our inspirations. That's where the Mujeres Muralistas came out of, San Francisco. All those sisters that were out there painting those murals, and all the murals that came out of the mission. In fact, Daniel Galvez, there's a portrait of Daniel Galvez in this exhibit, and he's painted all kinds of murals all over California, for the Oakland A's and everywhere else. There's murals in the state capitol. Daniel Galvez, one of the Chicano muralists, he's in our show. Juana Alicia, who also did a mural here at one of the elementary schools here, and Tanya lived here. She's in the exhibit as well, and was part of the mural movement, and continues to teach mural and the mural movement in the Bay Area. But it was the murals that were came out of the history of Mexico that brought that influence to it, and that's why it's always been like, we're so close to Mexico, we have that cross-cultural connection. We always will have it, regardless of the borders, because we're always going to be connected to it. And those artists, the other artist that's in the show, that's Amalia Besabanes, who's taught at Monterey College. She's here. Who else? There's Jaime Cortez, who's graduated from high school here. He did one of the pieces that's in the show. You'll see it. It's on what is it?
Online, like sexual fetishes.
It's on fetishes. It's on his fetishes and the guy shaving his head, right? But it's like this guy. All he wanted. When we went to see his studio, when we went to his studio to see his work, he showed us these pieces, and some of them were a little too racy to put in the show.